Have you ever wondered what a narcissist is really thinking after they discard you? Not the version you replay in your head at 3 a.m., not the excuses you build to survive the shock, and definitely not the sentimental narratives they once fed you. I mean the real reason, the one buried beneath their charm, their silence, and their carefully crafted persona. Because here's the truth. What looks like a chaotic, impulsive goodbye is actually one of the most calculated moves in their psychological playbook. Discard is not closure. It's not distance. It's a setup, a reset of power, a test to see whether your identity still bends around theirs even when they're gone. The moment they leave, you're thrown into confusion. One day they were affectionate, attentive, hungry for your presence. The next day, they vanish like you never existed. And in that vacuum, you start questioning everything, your worth, your memories, your sanity. But while you're drowning in unanswered questions, they're not confused at all. Their silence is intentional, their absence is strategic. Their detachment is a manipulation designed to destabilize you just enough so that when they return, and they always return, you will be more compliant, more forgiving, more disconnected from your own truth. This video isn't about blaming you or glorifying them. It's about decoding the exact psychological mechanics behind the discard. The silence, the hoovering, the smear campaigns, the future faking, and the sudden change of heart. Carl Jung once said that people don't have ideas, ideas have people, and narcissists are possessed by one idea above all else: control. Understanding their pattern is not theory, it's survival, it's clarity, it's the first door that leads you out of the maze. So today, we're going to break down exactly why they always come back, why the discard is never the end, and what their return really says about them, not you. If you've ever felt abandoned, confused, or haunted by the question, do they even care? This is where the spell breaks. Part 1. The silence before the storm. The narcissistic discard is never a breakup in the traditional sense. It is a severing, abrupt, disorienting, and designed to hit you at the core of your emotional stability. One moment they're intensely present, performing affection with precision, making you feel chosen, seen, even irreplaceable, and then, without warning, they pull the plug. The warmth disappears, the emotional intimacy evaporates. You're left with a silence so sharp it feels like the sound has been sucked out of the room. To the untrained eye, it looks like indifference. To a psychologist, it is a calculated withdrawal meant to trigger panic, self-doubt, and emotional dependency. What makes the initial discard so psychologically brutal is that it breaks the emotional pattern your brain relied on. Humans regulate emotions through predictability, but narcissists weaponize unpredictability. They condition you with cycles of intensity and withdrawal, so when the final disappearance happens, your nervous system spirals. You don't just miss them, you crave the relief their validation used to give you, and that craving is the hook they depend on. But while you're spiraling into confusion, the narcissist isn't lost. Their silence is not emotional collapse, it's strategy. They go quiet to regain control of the narrative. They need time to reset the balance of power, to watch your reaction from afar, to see if you will chase, apologize, or crumble. The silence is a test. Are you still emotionally programmable? Are you still available for manipulation? Are you still orbiting around them even in their absence? They disappear not because they are done with you, but because they are not done using you. And for many narcissists, the discard is also an opportunity to explore new supply. The moment they sense someone else who offers admiration, novelty, or emotional fuel, they pivot. They perform a new version of themselves, upgraded, edited, rehearsed, to impress the next target. And while they do this, they keep you on standby, muted but not deleted. The most haunting part? You often assume their silence means peace. But for a narcissist, silence is a laboratory. They observe, calculate, prepare. They aren't moving on, they're repositioning themselves. And in the architecture of their mind, the discard is never the end. It's the pause before the storm. the stillness before they re-enter your life to reclaim the emotional territory they believe they still own. According to Carl Jung, the narcissist's sudden detachment is a form of shadow distancing, pushing away anything that threatens to expose their inner emptiness. When they sense that intimacy might reveal their flaws, they retreat instantly. It's not that they can't feel, it's that feeling threatens the fragile persona they use to survive. So they run, they vanish, not to heal, but to protect the illusion of superiority. And while their silence feels like abandonment to you, it feels like safety to them. What you interpret as loss, they interpret as control. What you feel as heartbreak, they feel as victory, at least for now, because the silence is only temporary, and the return, the Hoover, is already being planned. Part 2. The Hoover Men of EU. Why they always come back. A narcissist never truly leaves. They only step back far enough to see how quickly you will reach for them. The Hoover begins long before you ever hear from them again. It starts in their mind the moment they realize that their absence hasn't broken you the way they expected. Narcissists don't come back because they suddenly miss you. They come back because something in their internal system malfunctions. Their new supply disappoints them, their ego feels threatened, or their sense of superiority cracks. And when that happens, their instinct isn't to reflect, it's to return to the one person who once made them feel powerful. You, the Hoover, isn't a message. It's a psychological operation. They reach out only when they sense that enough time has passed for your pain to soften and your memory to distort. They count on the fact that humans naturally remember emotional highs more vividly than emotional cruelty, so they reappear with the tone you recognize, warm, familiar, disarming. Not because they've changed, but because they know exactly what used to work. But the form of the Hoover is never random. It is tailored to your emotional history with them. If you were the caretaker, they'll come back wounded. If you were the fixer, they'll return broken. If you were the romantic, they'll return nostalgic. If you were the rational one, they'll come back logical and macho. If guilt controlled you, they'll come back apologizing just enough to trigger hope. Narcissists don't mirror who they are, they mirror who you needed them to be. The Hoover is engineered to target the exact wound that kept you bonded the first time. And yet, beneath every Hoover lies the same motive: control. They want to know if your heart is still open, if your boundaries still leak, if your identity still bends when they speak your name. Even a single reply, a simple "I'm fine," is enough to confirm that they still have access to your emotional world. Jung wrote that what we reject inwardly returns outwardly as fate. For the narcissist, the Hoover is that return. They aren't coming back for love, they're coming back to escape the emptiness that follows them everywhere they go. And when they sense your light from a distance, they try to siphon it again. Not because you belong together, but because their inner void is bottomless. But here's the turning point they never expect: when the person they once controlled no longer reacts, when your silence is no longer fear but sovereignty, when their return no longer feels like destiny but manipulation. Because in that moment the Hoover collapses, and a narcissist facing a closed door is one of the most powerless creatures you will ever witness. Their comeback isn't a compliment, it's evidence of the strength you didn't know you gained. Part 3. Smear campaigns and reputation sabotage. Long before a narcissist ever tries to come back, they make sure your world is already destabilized. And one of the most effective ways they do that is through the smear campaign, a psychological preemptive strike. While you're still trying to understand what happened, they've already begun rewriting the story for everyone else. Not because the story is true, but because they need to ensure that if the mask slips, you won't be believed. Smear campaigns are not spontaneous, they are insurance. A narcissist's greatest fear is public exposure, someone seeing behind their curated facade. So they flip the script first. They paint you as unstable so they won't look unpredictable. They portray you as cold so they can claim innocence. They subtly twist details so that your reactions appear irrational while their cruelty appears justified. It's not truth they're after, it's narrative control. They do it strategically. They start small, vague complaints, subtle hints that something is off with you. Then they escalate, private confessions to mutual friends, carefully delivered half-truths and stories crafted with just enough detail to sound believable. And finally, when the discard is complete, they launch the final blow, playing the victim. In every smear campaign, the narcissist is the wounded one, the betrayed one, the misunderstood one, and you become the villain in a movie you didn't consent to star in. But the real cruelty of a smear campaign isn't the lies they tell others, it's the emotional position it puts you in. You feel an urge to defend yourself, to explain, to clear your name, and that is exactly what they want. Because the moment you react, they can point and say, "See, that's what I meant." They push you into a corner, then tell the audience to watch how you behave when you're exposed. This is why engaging never works. The more you try to prove your innocence, the guiltier you appear in the distorted narrative they've engineered. Narcissists study people the same way they study their victims. They know who will believe them, who will spread the story, and who will stay neutral. They selectively target the emotionally impressionable, the ones who love drama, the ones who crave validation, the ones who want insider information. These individuals become the flying monkeys, psychological accomplices who attack you on the narcissist's behalf, sometimes without realizing it. And while the smear campaign feels personal, it's not. It is mechanical. It is predictable. It is their attempt to externalize their shame. What they accuse you of is what they fear you will reveal about them. Projection becomes protection. Character assassination becomes camouflage, and the louder they lie, the more terrified they are of the truth. From a Jungian lens, smear campaigns are the narcissist's subconscious attempt to keep their shadow locked away. If people see the shadow, the persona collapses, and with it their entire psychological identity. So they attack first, not to hurt you, but to survive themselves. But here's the part that ultimately frees you. A narcissist can manipulate people, but they cannot maintain coherence. Their stories eventually contradict, their performance eventually falters, and over time, the image they built crumbles under the weight of their own inconsistency. Truth doesn't need urgency. It only needs time, and their time always runs out. Part 4. The ghost of relationships past, future faking, and breadcrumbing. If the smear campaign is the narcissist's way of controlling the external narrative, future faking and breadcrumbing are how they control your internal narrative. These tactics don't target your reputation, they target your hope. Because long after the relationship ends, the most dangerous thing a narcissist can manipulate isn't your image, it's your imagination. Future faking is the art of promising a life they will never build. It's the illusion of change, the fantasy of a future that exists only in words, a psychological mirage designed to keep your heart emotionally invested even when the relationship is already dead. They know exactly which promises to make, the vacation they always postponed, the commitment they never gave, the dream of stability they kept dangling like a prize you were always one step away from earning. They resurrect these promises not because they intend to fulfill them, but because they need to keep the emotional door unlocked. Hope is their Trojan horse. It gets them in without resistance. Breadcrumbing is quieter, subtler, and in many ways more suffocating. It's not grand promises, it's tiny signals. A late-night like on your post, a vague "how have you been?", a song sent without context, an old photo resurfaced in your memories. These crumbs are strategically spaced, delivered right when you begin regaining your balance. They interrupt your healing rhythm, not enough to pull you back fully, but enough to keep you from moving forward completely. It's emotional pacing. They slow your progress to make sure you're never too far out of reach. And the truth is painful. Breadcrumbing doesn't mean they care. It means they don't want to lose access. They want the option to return. They want the emotional Wi-Fi password to still work whenever they feel lonely, bored, or threatened by the failure of their new supply. Breadcrumbing is possession disguised as connection. The psychological toll of these tactics is profound. Your nervous system becomes stuck between two states, the fear of being hurt again and the longing for the version of them that never existed. It is a loop, a suspended reality where your brain keeps waiting for closure, resolution, or redemption that will never arrive. And this is exactly what keeps the trauma bond alive. From a Jungian perspective, future faking taps into the archetype of the redeemer within the empath, the belief that love can transform darkness, that devotion can heal a wounded soul. Breadcrumbing, meanwhile, activates the archetype of the seeker, the part of you that longs for meaning, connection, and emotional certainty. The narcissist doesn't know Jung, but instinctively exploits these archetypes with uncanny precision. But the breakthrough comes when you finally recognize this pattern for what it is: not love, not hope, not destiny, but manipulation packaged as possibility. When you stop chasing the version of them that only exists in promises, their power dissolves. When you stop responding to crumbs, they lose access to your story, and when the fantasy collapses, so does their control. Part 5. Empowerment through understanding. Reclaiming your narrative. There comes a moment in every survivor's journey when the obsession with understanding them begins to fade, and the focus shifts back to understanding yourself. This shift is the real turning point, not the discard, not the Hoover, not even the smear campaign. The true breakthrough is when you stop analyzing their pathology and start reclaiming your own story. Because once you understand the pattern, the power no longer belongs to them, it returns to you. The first step is radical acceptance, not the passive kind that resigns itself to fate, but the conscious kind that sees the narcissist clearly without romanticizing the chaos or justifying the cruelty. Radical acceptance means acknowledging that their behavior was not a reflection of your worth, but a reflection of their wounds. It means unhooking your identity from their approval. It means understanding that the discard was never about you being not enough, but about you becoming harder to control. And from that clarity comes the foundation of healing: boundaries. Boundaries are not walls. They are definitions. They define where you end and where someone else begins. For a narcissist, boundaries are unbearable because they expose the limits of their influence. For you, boundaries are liberation because they reintroduce you to your own agency, your own voice, your own value. Saying no isn't an act of cruelty, it's an act of self-worth. And enforcing that no is the moment your self-worth becomes non-negotiable. Then comes the most misunderstood strategy of all: no contact. People often mistake no contact as avoidance, but in reality it is reclamation. It is you stepping back from the emotional battlefield and refusing to bleed for someone who feeds on conflict. No contact isn't about punishing the narcissist. They rarely feel punished anyway. It's about stabilizing your nervous system, regaining clarity, and breaking the psychological addiction that kept you trapped in cycles of longing and fear. Silence, in this context, is not emptiness. It is sovereignty. But reclaiming your narrative is not just about cutting off the toxic. It's about rebuilding the healthy. It's about remembering who you were before the manipulation rewired your identity. It's about reconnecting with the parts of you that went dormant: confidence, intuition, creativity, self-trust. Healing isn't a return to your old self. It is an expansion into a self you never had the safety to become. From a Jungian perspective, this stage marks the beginning of individuation, the process of integrating the wounded self with the awakened self. The empathy that once made you vulnerable becomes the empathy that makes you wise. The intuition that once warned you softly now speaks with authority. The boundaries that once felt unnatural now become your second skin. Jung believed that the moments of greatest suffering often lead to the birth of the self, the centered, grounded, sovereign version of who you truly are. And this transformation doesn't erase the pain. It gives it purpose. One day, without effort and without warning, you realize something extraordinary. You no longer want them back. You no longer need answers from them. You no longer feel small when you think of them. You no longer identify with the version of you who accepted their chaos as love. This is the moment the power dynamic flips permanently. Not because they let you go, but because you finally let them go. Not because they changed, but because you outgrew the version of yourself that needed their validation. The story is no longer about survival, it becomes about self-mastery, self-reclamation, and self-worth. And from here, you step into a life they can never follow you into, because it requires authenticity, humility, and inner stability, all things they spent their entire life avoiding. When you reclaim your narrative, their return no longer feels threatening. It feels irrelevant. In the end, the question that tormented you the most, why do they always come back, reveals something far more important than their intentions. It reveals how far you've come. Because the version of you who once waited for their message, analyzed every silence, forgave every betrayal, and held on to every promise, is not the same person standing here now. The truth is simple, but not easy. A narcissist comes back because they believe they still have access. They come back because they assume the door they walked out of will always remain unlocked. They come back because the version of you they once controlled exists, like a ghost in their memory. But the moment you awaken, truly awaken, that ghost disappears, and in its place is someone they never expected, a grounded, self-aware, sovereign version of yourself that their manipulation can no longer penetrate. This is the part they can't comprehend. Narcissists live in a world where people exist for their benefit, where relationships are tools, where emotions are resources to extract. They cannot understand growth because they never experience it. They cannot understand accountability because it threatens their ego. They cannot understand healing because it exposes the emptiness they've been running from their entire life. So when they come back and find you changed, calm, clear, uninterested, unmoved, it shakes them in ways they'll never admit. To them, your indifference is more devastating than your anger. Your silence is louder than their words. Your boundaries are stronger than their entire arsenal of tactics. And this is the moment the cycle finally ends. But when they apologize, not when they explain, not when they regret, but when you no longer need anything from them. Not validation, not closure, not understanding, not revenge. Your liberation begins the moment their return no longer stirs your emotions, when their presence no longer confuses your intuition, and their absence no longer destabilizes your peace. That is the moment you step out of the narrative they tried to trap you in. And if you're here, listening to this, you're closer to that moment than you think. The journey ahead is not about them. It's about you, your healing, your sovereignty, your future. It's about rebuilding a life that feels like yours again, a life rooted in clarity, not chaos, connection, not manipulation, self-worth, not self-sacrifice. If this video helped you see the pattern more clearly, if it helped you reclaim even a small piece of your truth, then make sure you subscribe. This channel exists for people like you, empaths, thinkers, survivors, and souls in the process of rising. Every video is a step toward deeper clarity, deeper strength, and deeper self-recognition. Your story isn't ending, it's just beginning. And this time, you're the one writing it.